What if one day, without warning, your family, your people, were suddenly marked for death? And what if the only person who could stop it realized she was also marked for death? While the empire celebrated, an evil man quietly prepared to destroy an entire nation. But to understand this, we must go back to the beginning of her story.
A forgotten girl named Esther was living quietly while the greatest empire on earth ruled around her. Persia celebrated loudly that night, but people inside the city still lived afraid. Some never returned after entering the palace walls. Mordecai looked toward the palace while families quietly locked their doors for the night. He knew poor people always suffer first when kings grow powerful. While rain fell outside, Esther quietly wondered if God still remembered forgotten people. She felt small inside the giant Persian Empire. As Esther walked through the streets, rich people laughed at her openly. She stayed quiet and kept walking. Suddenly, royal messengers ordered beautiful women brought to the palace immediately. Fear spread through Persia overnight. That evening, Esther noticed Mordecai could barely keep his hands from shaking.
Mordecai, why are your hands shaking?
Something terrible had happened. Mordecai finally revealed the king was gathering women for the palace. Most girls entering those gates never returned home again. While soldiers searched homes nearby, frightened families quickly hid their daughters indoors. As cold rain fell outside, Esther quietly packed the few things she owned.
That felt safe.
She felt her safe life disappearing.
Being taken away.
Before sunrise, families cried quietly while daughters prepared to leave for the palace.
Never forget who you are.
Mordecai begged Esther never forget who she truly was. As the wagons rolled through Persia, people stopped everything just to stare at the frightened girls. Some dreamed about the palace, others feared it. When Esther finally saw the palace gates, the beauty of the place almost overwhelmed her.
Brighter than the sun.
But something about those walls still felt cold and wrong. Inside the palace, girls covered themselves with perfume, jewelry, and expensive fabrics every single day. Some secretly cried whenever nobody was watching them. While most girls fought desperately for attention, Esther stayed quiet and listened carefully instead. Haggai quickly realized she was different from the others. Late that night, Esther stared down at the glowing city far below the palace windows. She quietly prayed God would not forget her there. Every day inside the palace felt slower, quieter, and more lonely than the last. Even the beautiful halls started feeling like a prison. Haggai began helping Esther more than the others without fully explaining why. He saw something inside her the palace could not fake. As Esther prepared herself beside the mirror, she barely recognized the girl staring back anymore.
Every day here
the palace was slowly changing her. Outside the palace walls, Mordecai waited near the gates, hoping to see Esther again. She was hidden behind the palace now, but never forgotten. One morning, the entire beauty court exploded into panic after another royal selection was announced. Everyone suddenly became terrified of being chosen next. Girls competed desperately for attention, while servants covered them in perfume and expensive jewelry. Esther quietly stepped away from all the noise. While standing alone above the city, Esther watched ordinary people living freely far below the palace.
Now it feels.
She missed her old life more every day. That night, Haggai brought Esther elegant clothing far simpler than the others were given. He believed quiet grace was stronger than loud beauty. His names echoed through the hallways. Frightened girls disappeared behind the royal doors, one by one. Everyone feared coming back different afterward. Late that night, Esther sat alone beside the lamp while cold wind moved through the palace. She feared forgetting who she truly was. Before sunrise, servants dressed Esther in royal clothing beneath hundreds of glowing palace lanterns. The orphan girl from the streets was becoming Persia's future queen. When Esther's name echoed through the hallway, the entire palace suddenly turned silent around her. Everyone knew walking through those doors changed people forever. As Esther walked toward the throne room, every step felt heavier than the last. She quietly begged God not to let fear control her. Outside the palace, Mordecai waited anxiously near the gates while the city continued moving normally. He prayed Esther would not face the palace alone. The throne chamber stood enormous and silent beneath towering golden pillars and burning firelight. Even powerful men lowered their voices near the king. When Esther entered the throne room, hundreds of eyes followed her through the chamber. She tried desperately not to show how afraid she felt. Unlike the others before her, Esther did not force confidence or speak endlessly before the king. Her quiet honesty immediately caught his attention. As the conversation continued, the king listened more carefully to Esther with every passing moment. She spoke honestly instead of trying to impress him. After leaving the throne room, Esther walked alone through the quiet palace halls late that night. The silence afterward frightened her more than the king himself. The next morning, disappointed girls quietly packed their belongings beneath heavy silence inside the palace. The palace taught people to dream, then crushed those dreams quickly. As the beauty court slowly emptied, servants and guards began treating Esther very differently. People who once ignored her suddenly watched her carefully. Whispers about Esther spread constantly through the palace corridors beneath glowing lantern light. The king had started remembering her name. Outside the palace walls, Mordecai continued waiting near the gates almost every single day. He feared power changing Esther more than the palace itself. During royal feasts, Esther quietly studied the smiling faces surrounding the king's court. She realized many people inside the palace were pretending constantly. As Esther crossed the moonlit courtyards alone, her old life already felt very far away. She feared one day forgetting it completely. One morning, the palace erupted after the king suddenly requested Esther before the royal court again. Even the noble women stared at her with growing jealousy. When Esther entered the throne room again, the fear inside her felt strangely different now. The palace no longer terrified her the same way before. The king continued speaking privately with Esther, long after most servants had already left the chamber. Her honesty slowly softened something inside him. Elsewhere in the palace, jealous noblewomen quietly whispered bitterly about Esther late into the night. They feared the king already favored her. While rain fell across the palace rooftops, Esther sat alone beside the window deep in thought. The closer she stood to power, the lonelier she became. Haggai quietly brought Esther royal garments while servants treated her with growing respect outside the chamber. The palace already moved differently around her now. As giant banners waved above Persia, Mordecai sensed dangerous changes quietly growing inside the palace. He knew kingdoms often destroy themselves from within first. While walking through the royal gardens, Esther noticed guards and servants lowering their eyes before her. People were suddenly afraid to even look at her directly. One evening, the entire palace exploded into celebration during another massive royal banquet. Music, laughter, and wine filled every golden hall in Persia. When Esther entered the banquet hall, conversation slowly stopped throughout the entire chamber. Even the king himself stood to greet her. As Esther sat beside the throne, she felt the palace watching every movement she made. The king realized she feared power more than desired it. Outside the palace celebration, Mordecai watched wealthy nobles arriving beneath giant burning torches. The louder Persia celebrated, the more uneasy he became. Later that night, Esther stood alone above the glowing Persian capital beneath gathering storm clouds. While returning through the palace halls, Esther overheard nervous guards whispering beside a dark corridor. The moment they noticed her, both immediately fell silent. As Esther walked toward the throne, fear and pressure nearly overwhelmed her completely. She quietly begged herself not to disappear inside the palace. When the king finally stood from the throne, the entire royal court fell completely silent. Every eye inside Persia suddenly focused on Esther alone. As servants carried the royal crown forward, whispers spread quickly across the stunned chamber. The invisible orphan girl was about to become queen. While the palace celebrated loudly around her, Esther suddenly felt completely alone inside. Becoming queen somehow felt more painful than joyful. News of Esther's coronation spread rapidly through Persia before the morning even fully arrived. The entire empire celebrated its new queen. When Mordecai finally heard the royal announcement, relief and fear filled him at once. Esther survived the palace, but now belonged to it. Inside her new royal chambers, servants surrounded Esther with endless luxury and expensive gifts. Nothing around her felt familiar anymore. That evening, Esther stood alone above the glowing Persian capital while celebrations continued below. The empire saw a queen, but she still felt like an orphan. As attendants prepared her before the royal mirror, Esther barely recognized herself anymore. She missed the quiet life she once hated. Throughout the royal court, nobles carefully watched Esther during every feast and conversation. Some admired her influence, while others secretly feared it. One afternoon, Esther secretly met Mordecai again inside a quiet outer palace courtyard. For a moment, the palace almost felt far away. Mordecai warned Esther that power always demands something from the people closest to it. The nearer she stood to the throne, the more dangerous life became. Later that evening, Esther walked alone through the endless golden palace halls, deep in thought. She could feel something dangerous hiding beneath the palace beauty. Late that night, Mordecai secretly overheard royal guards whispering inside a dark palace corridor. They were no longer speaking against the king. They were planning against him. Hidden inside the shadows, Mordecai listened while the nervous guards argued beneath flickering torchlight. They feared being discovered before sunrise. As the conversation continued, Mordecai realized the palace itself was becoming dangerously unstable. After the guards disappeared, Mordecai stepped carefully from the shadows with growing panic. The greatest danger in Persia was already inside the palace walls. While rain fell across the city, Esther stood alone above Persia, deep in uneasy silence. Every night inside the palace felt darker than the last. Before sunrise, Mordecai waited secretly near the servant gates beneath the cold rain. He needed Esther to hear the truth immediately. As attendants prepared Esther for another royal morning, storm clouds gathered quietly outside the palace. Something dangerous was already beginning to move beneath Persia. Later that morning, Esther secretly met Mordecai inside one of the quieter palace courtyards. As Esther entered the throne room, she realized staying silent could destroy the entire kingdom. For the first time, she openly warned the king about danger inside the palace. The chamber fell silent while Esther revealed everything Mordecai secretly overheard that night. Even the king realized traitors were hiding beside the throne itself. Before midnight, royal guards stormed through the palace corridors, searching for the conspirators immediately. The terrified men realized their secret plan had already been exposed. By morning, whispers about the conspiracy spread fearfully throughout the entire Persian palace. Everyone suddenly understood how close the kingdom came to disaster. That night, Esther stood alone beside the palace window while thunder echoed across Persia. She realized becoming queen was only the beginning of her story.
The palace knows my name now.
Esther became Queen of Persia, but the palace still felt dangerous to her. Nobody inside the palace knew who she really was. Servants dressed Esther like royalty every morning, but deep inside, Esther still felt afraid and alone. Far below the palace, Mordecai watched Persia carefully from the crowded marketplace streets. He knew dangerous people often hide behind power and smiles. The palace filled itself with music, wine, laughter, and royal celebrations every night. But Esther noticed fear hiding behind every smile inside the court. After the celebrations ended, Esther walked the palace hallways alone beneath flickering lanterns. The palace no longer felt peaceful or safe anymore. Esther watched the kingdom from her window every morning. The palace slowly changed the way she thought about everything. Nobles watched Esther carefully whenever she entered the royal court. The king trusted her more, and people quietly noticed it. Servants whispered about a powerful advisor rising beside the king. Even hearing his name made people nervous and quiet. The palace celebrated every night with music, laughter, and royal feasts. But Esther noticed fear hiding behind nearly every smile there. Late at night, Esther crossed the palace bridges completely alone. The palace felt less like home every single day. Servants rushed through the palace halls early that morning. People whispered the king would honor someone important today. Esther stood beside the throne while nobles slowly filled the royal court. Everyone inside the palace looked nervous about something coming. The palace doors opened while guards lowered their spears across the throne chamber. That was the moment Esther first saw Haman. Haman walked through the royal court while nobles quickly stepped aside for him. People feared him before he even spoke a word. Haman spoke calmly beside the king, while the entire court listened silently. Esther immediately felt something dangerous hiding behind his smile. The king publicly honored Haman before the entire palace and royal court. Nobody dared question the king's newest powerful advisor. Haman crossed the palace halls while servants quickly lowered themselves before him. Fear followed him through every room inside the palace.
No man inside Persia has served this throne more faithfully than Haman.
The calmer Haman acted, the more dangerous he seemed. That night, Esther stood alone outside the palace, beneath the dark sky. The palace suddenly felt smaller and more dangerous to her. The king ordered everyone throughout Persia to bow before Haman publicly. But one man inside Persia refused doing it. Crowds bowed before Haman throughout the busy marketplace streets that afternoon. That man still hasn't bowed. Haman suddenly noticed Mordecai standing among the kneeling crowds beside the gates. The entire marketplace became silent after Haman stopped moving. Servants spread rumors through the palace after Mordecai dishonored Haman publicly. Fear quickly returned to the palace hallways again. That night, Esther stood beside the palace windows, watching the sleeping city below. The palace no longer felt beautiful or peaceful anymore. Haman returned to the royal court the following morning beside the king's throne. Hidden anger quietly filled him. Citizens slowly stopped standing near Mordecai throughout the crowded marketplace streets. Fear made people avoid him more every day. Palace servants whispered nervously whenever Haman entered the marble hallways nearby. Haman does not forgive insults. Esther watched Haman carefully during another royal gathering beside the king. He smiles constantly, but his eyes never do. Late that night, Haman stood alone overlooking Persia from the palace balcony. One stubborn man will soon regret embarrassing me publicly. The palace suddenly became quieter beneath Persia's cold morning skies. Everyone feared saying the wrong thing around Haman. Mordecai still refused bowing before Haman beside the crowded marketplace gates. Haman will never forget this public insult. Haman stood beside the throne, while nobles lowered themselves before him silently. His anger toward Mordecai kept growing every day. Esther walked alone through the palace gardens. The palace looked beautiful, but felt dangerous to her. Now, rumors about Mordecai spread quickly throughout the royal court and palace hallways. Haman's anger has become personal now. Esther sat beside her palace window while servants prepared royal clothing nearby. She feared her secret identity becoming impossible to hide. Haman's royal procession crossed the marketplace while crowds bowed before him publicly. But Mordecai still refused lowering himself before Haman. The marketplace became silent after Haman saw Mordecai standing again beside the gates. One man's pride insults the entire throne. That night, Haman gathered trusted advisors inside one of the palace chambers. Esther watched Haman speaking calmly beside the king inside the royal court.
Hide their anger.
The calmer Haman looked, the more dangerous he seemed.
Your loyalty is
Mordecai sat beside the marketplace stairs, while royal messengers crossed Persia's crowded streets. Fear still could not change Mordecai's decision. Late that night,
grows quieter.
Esther walked alone through the palace corridors beneath the dark sky. The palace kept growing quieter and more frightening. Haman studied royal scrolls beside trusted advisors inside the palace chambers quietly. Dangerous plans were already forming around the royal table. Frightened whispers spread quickly through the palace hallways. The following morning, something dangerous is beginning inside this palace. Haman stood alone above Persia beside the enormous palace balcony that night.
will decide who
Soon the empire itself would fear his power completely.
does not.
Servants rushed through the palace halls before sunrise, carrying royal scrolls everywhere.
Spreading like fire.
People feared something terrible was about to happen. Nobles gathered nervously inside the royal court beside Persia's throne that morning.
Honestly.
Everyone suddenly looked afraid to speak honestly anymore. Royal messengers crossed the marketplace carrying sealed scrolls through Persia's crowded streets. People now feared even speaking Mordecai's name publicly. Haman spoke privately with trusted advisors inside one of the palace chambers. Esther walked quietly through the palace gardens. The palace kept becoming more beautiful and more frightening. Crowds bowed before Haman throughout the marketplace streets that afternoon. But Mordecai still refused bowing before him publicly. Haman stared at Mordecai while the entire marketplace stayed completely silent. One stubborn man is poisoning respect throughout Persia. Nobles gathered inside the royal court, while sealed scrolls spread across Persia. Nobody inside the royal court dared openly question Haman anymore. Fear now controlled nearly every conversation inside the palace. Esther sat beside the palace window while rain covered the city outside. The entire palace felt tense and strangely quiet now.
About the empire.
The royal decrees spread quickly between frightened families across Persia's marketplaces. The empire suddenly stopped feeling safe overnight. Haman met privately with advisors, while fear continued spreading across Persia publicly. Esther stood alone outside the palace, looking across the frightened empire below.
Something terrible is spreading through Persia and nobody inside this palace wants to stop it.
Mordecai tore his clothes publicly after hearing the king's decree in the marketplace. Entire families will suffer because of one man's hatred. Fear spread through the royal court, while Haman stood beside the throne calmly.
The palace looks free anymore.
Nobody inside the palace looked free anymore. Esther stared at herself inside the palace mirror late that evening.
Dangerous my silence
The longer she stayed silent, the more dangerous it became.
The empire suddenly
Royal decrees continued spreading quickly through Persia's frightened cities and marketplaces.
guards are near.
The empire suddenly felt unsafe for innocent families everywhere.
Speaks the truth soon.
Esther stood alone outside the palace before sunrise, watching Persia below her. She realized silence inside the palace was becoming dangerous. Nobles gathered nervously inside the royal court beside the king's throne again. Fear now controlled Persia more than peace or loyalty.
Maybe Esther was brought into the palace for far more than becoming queen.
Sooner or later, this palace will force me to choose between protecting myself or protecting my people.
Esther had been hiding her secret of being a Jew for weeks, but the weight of it was finally crushing her. The exhaustion hit her all at once. Her legs gave out, and she began to fall. A guard caught her just before she collapsed. He walked beside her, watching her closely with worry. A servant hurried toward Esther, checking that no one was watching.
Queen Esther.
He pressed a hidden letter into her trembling hands. Esther sat alone, staring at the sealed message in her hands. She was almost too afraid to find out what it said. Esther finally begins opening Mordecai's hidden letter inside her private chamber. But before fully reading it, she suddenly hears footsteps outside and hesitates in fear. She read the words, and the letter slipped from her fingers. Her people had been marked for complete destruction across the empire. Outside the palace, Mordecai walked through the streets wearing torn clothing. Frightened families gathered around royal decrees. Haman moved through the palace slowly, enjoying every bow and stare. Esther could not sit still after reading what the decree said.
This can't be happening.
She paced the room alone. She grabbed the letter and moved it toward the flame. Then she froze, remembering that Mordecai still knew nothing at all. She knew she had to warn him, so she started writing a letter to him. Esther cracked open her chamber door and handed the letter over. She whispered urgently, "Make sure absolutely nobody follows you out there." Mordecai sat grieving alone in the crowded streets below the palace. A messenger quietly dropped a hidden letter beside him. Mordecai read Esther's message. He grabbed the messenger's shoulders, warning that silence would destroy them all. Mordecai sat in the crowded streets, urgently writing his response back. His hands were trembling, and panic was written all over his face. The messenger hurried back through the palace, hiding the letter inside his robes. A royal guard stepped directly into his path and demanded answers, but he sneaked out. Esther slowly unfolded Mordecai's letter alone inside her dark chamber. The moment she finished reading, her legs almost gave out completely. Mordecai wrote a strict charge commanding Esther to go before the king, plead for mercy, and beg for the lives of her people. Esther stared silently toward the distant throne hallway. A young servant quietly knocked and slowly entered the dark chamber. She froze the moment she saw Esther's exhausted, tear-stained face. Esther stood weakly and turned toward the frightened servant beside her. She asked quietly how many days remained before the decree spread everywhere. The servant lowered her eyes and explained that mourning had already begun. People were filling the streets and the fear was spreading fast. Esther turned away, then stopped, realizing she could no longer stay silent. She told the servant to gather every loyal Jewish servant secretly. Frightened servants quietly moved through the palace hallways. Late that night, they slipped into hidden chambers, careful that no guard saw them. The room fell completely silent the moment Esther stepped inside. One servant whispered softly, "The queen is here." Esther stood before the frightened gathering and struggled to find words. She finally told them, "The decree was written against us." A servant rushed forward and grabbed Esther's wrist with trembling hands. She begged her desperately, "Please don't go before the king." Esther pulled away and walked slowly toward the far palace wall. She whispered, "Every choice I have ends with someone dying." An older servant stepped forward and spoke to Esther gently. She said, "Maybe you were brought into this palace for this moment." Esther looked slowly across the room at every frightened face around her. She whispered quietly, "Then it has to be me." Esther straightened herself and lifted her eyes toward the gathered servants. Her voice was calm as she declared, "For 3 days we fast." Across Persia, Jewish families quietly began fasting and praying together in secret. Empty tables, candlelight, and whispered prayers filled the long, fearful night. Servants prepared quietly for the fast, while Esther sat completely still. Esther walked alone through the hallway and heard distant laughter from inside. The palace was celebrating while her people starved out in the streets. Esther stepped closer and saw the enormous banquet overflowing with food and light. She stood alone in the shadows, watching the painful difference silently. Esther returned to her chamber and slowly began removing her royal jewelry. She whispered quietly, "None of this can save anyone at all." Exhausted servants continued fasting through the palace hallways. The following morning, One nearly collapsed, and another quietly caught her before she fell. Haman crossed the throne chamber, and every noble immediately lowered themselves before Haman.
Soon,
Cold satisfaction quietly grew across his face. Mordecai stood weakly among the grieving crowds gathered throughout the marketplace. Esther stood alone before the palace mirror late that same evening. She whispered, "If he looks away from me, I die." Esther stood beside the lantern table, imagining the walk toward the throne. The endless corridor ahead of her felt like a path toward execution. Servants continued fasting together inside the hidden chamber the following morning. Their trembling hands and dry lips revealed how painful the sacrifice had become. Haman noticed unusual silence and nervous behavior spreading throughout the palace.
hiding something.
He stopped walking, and cold suspicion quietly began growing across his face. Esther stood before the mirror, quietly practicing what she might say. Every time, fear shattered her composure before she could finish the words. Mordecai prayed in the marketplace while exhausted families stared toward the palace. Their entire future now rested on one frightened queen behind those walls. A servant warned Esther that even powerful nobles feared the throne room. Hearing it spoken aloud made the fear on Esther's face visibly deepen. Esther walked alone toward the throne corridor for the very first time. Overwhelming fear froze her completely before she could take another step forward. Esther returned to her chamber and stood silently beside the trembling lantern. She finally accepted, "If I perish, then I perish." The final fasting day began, and Esther sat weakly beside the untouched table. Her trembling hand reached toward the food, then slowly pushed it away. Servants quietly prepared Esther's royal clothing with trembling and tearful hands. One whispered softly, "Please come back to us." Haman crossed the palace halls while servants bowed long before he arrived. He calmly adjusted his ring, completely convinced nothing could stop him now. Esther knelt alone beside the lantern with her eyes tightly closed. She whispered with trembling lips, "God, please stay with me today." Mordecai watched the palace from the crowded marketplace below with desperate hope. He tightened the prayer cloth in his hands and waited. Servants quietly helped Esther dress in royal clothing after 3 painful days. She fixed the crown herself, then stood weakly to her feet. Esther began walking slowly through the enormous palace corridors toward the throne. Servants stepped aside silently. Esther finally stopped before the gigantic throne room doors and barely breathed.
This is it.
The fate of every Jewish family in Persia rested on her shoulders. The massive doors began slowly opening with deep metallic echoes all around. Esther stepped back slightly, realizing there was absolutely no turning back. According to the Persian law, anyone entering the throne room without invitation could be executed by a golden scepter unless the king lowered his weapon. Esther saw the enormous throne chamber stretching endlessly before her for the first time. The long, dangerous walk toward the distant throne felt impossibly terrifying. Nobles, servants, and musicians slowly noticed Esther standing near the entrance unexpectedly. A silver cup dropped. Music stopped. Guards tightened their grip around their spears the moment they saw her. Esther gripped her royal dress, struggling to control her shaking breathing. The entire throne room had noticed Esther, but the king had not looked up. Every second of waiting felt completely unbearable to everyone watching silently. The king finally stopped reading and slowly lifted his eyes toward her. The entire court froze. Frightened nobles and servants quietly expected the king to order her execution.
This could end terribly.
Esther stood trembling, her watery eyes barely holding the tears back. After a terrifying silence, the king slowly began reaching toward the golden scepter. Haman watched from the side, completely unaware of who Esther truly was. The king stared toward Esther without yet touching the golden scepter beside him. guards gripped their spears tightly, while no one in the room dared breathe. The king slowly began lifting the golden scepter, and shock spread across the room. One servant covered his face in relief as the guards loosened their grip. The moment Esther realized she was spared, relief nearly weakened her legs completely. She gripped her dress tightly.
I'm alive.
Barely able to speak, Esther began walking slowly toward the throne. Esther finally reached the throne and respectfully lowered herself before the king. Esther stood before the throne and struggled to force the truth into words. Fear stopped her every time,
King, I wish
so she briefly glanced toward Haman instead. Esther surprised the entire court by inviting the king and Haman to a banquet. Haman straightened proudly, convinced the queen was specifically honoring him above everyone. The king calmly agreed, and the dangerous tension in the room slowly softened. Haman smiled proudly, still completely unaware Esther secretly belonged to his enemies. Esther stepped away from the throne and felt hundreds of eyes still following her. Haman watched her leave, growing suspicion quietly mixing with his obvious pride. Nervous whispers spread across the throne room as Esther turned away from the king. Nobody could quite believe she had actually survived walking in. Haman remained near the court, pride spreading dangerously across his entire expression. He quietly believed the banquet invitation proved he stood above everyone in Persia. Word spread through the streets that Esther had survived entering the throne room. Mordecai lifted his eyes toward the palace and whispered, "God protected her." Esther sat alone in her chamber afterward, the heavy crown set beside her. She whispered weakly,
Everything.
"Tomorrow decides everything." Haman crossed the palace corridors with satisfaction and arrogance, following every step. He still had absolutely no idea what Esther was quietly planning against him. Exhausted servants continued praying together inside the hidden chamber late that night.
Her people.
One nearly collapsed, while whispered desperate prayers quietly filled the flickering room. Esther stood alone beside the palace window, staring across the dark, sleeping city. She pressed one trembling hand against the cold marble and quietly prayed. Royal servants rushed through the banquet hall, preparing food, cups, and decorations carefully. Everything must be perfect. Frightened servants quietly helped Esther prepare for the dangerous royal banquet ahead. She never looked away from the mirror, mentally preparing herself like a soldier. Haman crossed the palace corridors toward the banquet with growing arrogance and excitement. He adjusted his royal robe proudly, whispering to himself, "Tonight belongs to me." Frightened Jewish families gathered again in the marketplace, praying for Esther's banquet.
Please, God, guide her.
Mordecai stood among the exhausted crowd. The king entered the glowing banquet hall beside his guards and musicians. He looked around calmly
Queen Esther.
and asked quietly, "Where is Queen Esther tonight?" Haman entered the banquet chamber with immediate confidence and growing satisfaction. Esther quietly entered the banquet hall and forced herself appearing completely calm. She tightened her fingers against her dress before finally sitting beside the king. Luxurious food and soft music filled the enormous glowing banquet chamber around them. The king noticed Esther had barely touched the food resting before her. She accidentally brushed a golden cup, spilling wine across the banquet table. Esther struggled for several terrifying moments to reveal the truth to the king. She opened her mouth, froze completely, and said almost nothing at all. Esther quickly changed the subject while awkward confusion spread across the glowing chamber. She forced a calm smile and whispered, "Tomorrow I will explain everything." Haman left the banquet overflowing with pride and satisfaction in every step. He adjusted his royal robes confidently, convinced tomorrow would be even greater. Haman gathered his family and advisors and boasted excitedly about the royal banquet.
Esther
He
invited
declared proudly secretly that the queen herself had honored him above all. But the moment Mordecai crossed his mind, Haman's expression completely darkened. He gripped his golden cup tightly, whispering that none of it mattered yet. Mordecai continued standing publicly in the marketplace, despite the growing danger around him. Royal guards quietly watched him. Haman's advisors gathered and listened as he described Mordecai's continued refusal to bow. An older advisor calmly suggested building a pole and hanging Mordecai upon it. Workers secretly began building the enormous wooden execution pole in the palace courtyard. Far from the palace, Mordecai prayed quietly in the dark marketplace, completely unaware. He had no idea Haman was already preparing to publicly execute him. Haman walked proudly around the growing execution pole, with dangerous excitement overwhelming him. He touched his royal ring calmly and whispered, Tomorrow, the city finally bows." Late that same night, King Ahasuerus found himself completely unable to sleep. He paced the silent royal chamber, unable to understand the restlessness consuming him. After hours without sleep, the king finally ordered ancient royal records brought to him. Servants carefully unrolled dusty scrolls while servants read aloud. The king suddenly discovered Mordecai had once saved his life. He stared at the records slowly, struggling to believe such loyalty had been forgotten. Servants quietly informed the king that Mordecai had never received any reward at all. The king stood slowly, visible frustration spreading across his exhausted, troubled face.
Today, Mordecai finally...
Just before sunrise, Haman entered the palace, intending to request Mordecai's public execution. He had no idea the sleepless king had spent all night thinking about Mordecai. The king noticed Haman entering, while ancient royal records still lay open before him. Before Haman could speak, the king interrupted the silence with a single calm question. The king asked what should be done for the man he wished to honor. Haman quietly convinced himself the king could only be talking about him. Believing the honor was meant for himself, Haman described the greatest reward imaginable. The king said, royal robes, the king's own horse, and a grand parade throughout the entire city. The king listened calmly, then commanded Haman to do exactly that for Mordecai. Haman stood completely frozen, while horrifying realization slowly crashed over his entire expression. Haman could not speak for several long moments after hearing the king's command. Royal servants approached Mordecai in the crowded streets, carrying robes and the king's horse. Mordecai stared in complete confusion, quietly asking what any of this meant. With humiliation crushing him completely, Haman unwillingly led Mordecai through the crowded streets.
If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe and like this video. It will truly help with our animation industry.